In the spring of 1993, I became a gamekeeper in the Tunguska Nature Reserve. I remember that day down to the smallest detail. The chilly morning, the smell of melted snow and pine needles, the creak of floorboards in the old administrative building. At that time, in my 37 years, I had no idea that the next 2 years would change my whole life. Before that, like many in our village, I had been earning casual wages. Times were not easy. I lived modestly with my wife and 2 children, but against the background of the general devastation, it was a sin to complain. There was a roof over our heads, the vegetable garden fed us, and we could always pick mushrooms and berries in the forest. Only the soul asked for something more than just survival. Gregory Thompson, the very huntsman who became my mentor, at first looked at me with doubt. I remember his first words. "So you say you've been at home in the taiga since childhood?" Well. And then he spent a year chasing me all over the site, teaching me to read footprints, understand the habits of animals, feel the breath of the forest. "The taiga does not forgive mistakes," he liked to repeat when I tried to take a shortcut or neglect some trifle. The plot we got was not small, 46 square miles in the heart of the reserve. It was riddled with creeks, elevation changes, and old geologic workings. At first I made detailed maps of each detour, and now I can tell with closed eyes where the trail loops, in which hollow and the spring bears make dens. My wife was worried at first. The work was dangerous and the pay wasn't much, but I saw how proud my children were of me. My son, who was 12 at the time, kept asking for binoculars to play with, and my daughter told everyone at school that her daddy protects animals from bad people. Back then in 1993, I could not imagine that in just 2 years I would look into the eyes of my mentor, and for the first time in my life I would not be able to withstand his gaze. But it was still a long way off, and the taiga was just beginning to reveal its dark secrets to me. August 1994 was an unusually hot August. It hadn't rained in 3 weeks, and the taiga lay in anxious anticipation. The pines were as dry as matchsticks. The rustling of leaves had long ago been replaced by a dead silence. Even the birds were silent, as if they sensed trouble. In such days, every spark could turn into a real hell. The hunters were the first to sound the alarm. Stephen Harper, an old fisherman, stopped me at the store and spoke, at length, as if reluctantly, about the strange fires on the border of the reserve. Small, quickly extinguished, but too much like each other. "That's not good, Nicholas," was all he said in parting. I didn't pay much attention to these conversations. I wondered what the old man would dream up in the woods. But in a couple of days, other hunters began to talk about the same thing. And when I came across 3 identical fires in one day during my routine rounds, it was clear. It wasn't clean. Gregory Thompson, though about to retire, still had his finger on the pulse of the preserve. "Don't write it off as an accident," he told me at the time. "Look closely at the burned-out plots. They're all next to the plots of the timber farm, and they've got a new director, 3 months old." The new director turned out to be Simon Pierce, a newcomer to the area, but he had already managed to make a mark with revolutionary ideas on the development of forest resources. I began to look more closely and noticed a strange pattern. Every fire occurred in the area where the forest was particularly good for felling. One morning, while checking another burned area, I found the charred remains of some kind of device. It was a small box with wires, obviously not the kind of thing that happens to be found in the remote taiga. I twirled the find in my hands, feeling my back grow cold. It was neither hunting gear nor tourist trash. Someone had left it with intent. But no sooner had I examined the find than I heard the noise of a car. Hiding behind a fallen tree, I saw a brand new Jeep of the timber industry and Arkhipov himself, who was scrutinizing the fire. That same evening his deputy came to see me. Smiling softly, he started from afar. About hard times, about how important it is to support each other, about opportunities for mutually beneficial cooperation. He kept fiddling with a button on his jacket, and then suddenly lowered his voice. "You don't want your children in the village to hear rumors, do you?" I didn't listen any further and pointed to the door. A week later, during my routine rounds, I found the exact same device in my UAZIK that I had found at the fire. Carefully hidden under the seat, it was obviously intended for accidental finding by the inspectors. The picture was ugly. To set fire to the forest, to write it off on the huntsman's negligence, and then to take the damaged timber for nothing. I took out my father's old Zenith and began methodically photographing everything. Fire sites, traces of machinery, the device itself. Gregory Thompson taught me how to take the right pictures, with a ruler next to it, with the date on a piece of paper in the frame. "The evidence has to be ironclad," he used to say, "or they'll get trampled on and not notice." I showed the device to Michael Jennings, a mechanic at the lumber yard. He had worked there a long time ago, under the old director, and, as it turned out, he couldn't stand Arkhipov. "It's an improvised device," he said, looking at the find, "for setting fires. See the timer? To get away from it in time." He agreed to write a formal report, though he was afraid. He had 2 years to go before he retired. Gregory Thompson, meanwhile, was getting his own way. He wrote letters to the Environmental Prosecutor's Office, to the OBEP, even to the regional newspaper. In the past, such letters used to work quickly. He sighed. But now they either get lost or are bought off. But water grinds a stone. He gathered signatures from other gamekeepers, testimony from hunters. Day after day, he stacked the evidence like cartridges in a magazine. In September, the regional newspaper published a small article about strange fires in the reserve. It seemed like nothing special, a couple of paragraphs on the last page. But a week later, there was another article, a bigger one, and then another. The journalist, an old friend of Gregory Thompson's, started digging deeper. He found out about the pending foreign deal, the gray paperwork. By the end of September, an inspection from the region came to the reserve. Formal, for a tick, so it seemed to everyone. But by that time, we had a whole dossier. Photos, witness statements, a mechanic's report, documents on the preparation of the deal. Arkhipov tried to put pressure on the inspectors, hinted at connections at the top. A day later, a serious commission came to the reserve, with the prosecutor's office, with OBP. Then everything spun up unexpectedly fast. Other witnesses and documents about similar schemes at Arkhipav's former place of work were found. Some of his associates panicked and began to testify. By November, the case was submitted to the court. A month later, the regional newspaper published a big article about the prevented environmental crime. I folded the newspaper and looked out the window for a long time at the purple sunset over the taiga. Victory seemed hollow, too many questions left unanswered. That evening, looking through the documents with evidence, I came across one curious trail that led somewhere very high, but it was left untraced. And the fall that year was unusually beautiful. It was as if the taiga itself was celebrating the deliverance from trouble. I often remember those days, when my faith in justice was still so simple and unshakable. After all, very soon I was to learn that not everything in life is divided into black and white, and that the most terrifying secrets of the taiga may not be where you are looking for them. October 1994 was a strange year. After a hot summer and a bright autumn, it was as if nature had decided to take revenge. The fogs covered the taiga with a dense blanket of milk. On such days, the sounds spread in a special way, and the forest itself becomes somehow alien, unfamiliar. Everything began with the usual morning rounds. The fog was so thick that you could not see anything at 5 paces. Suddenly I heard it. A long, childlike crying sound. It came from somewhere deep in the forest, fading in and out, then gaining strength again. I froze. Over the years in the taiga, I had learned to distinguish all her voices, but I had never heard such a sound. My first thought was a child. But how could there be a child here in the wilderness? It was over 19 miles to the nearest village. I moved toward the sound, trying to determine its source. The cries drew nearer and farther away, as if someone were deliberately leading me in circles. Gregory Thompson, when I told him about it, grew strangely somber. I haven't heard that voice in a long time. He stretched out thoughtfully. The taiga is trying to show you something, Nicholas. Look closely, all the small animals have gone from that neighborhood. Even the birds have flown away. The next day I heard the crying again. This time the sound was closer, more distinct. And there was something predatory. It was not the crying of a child, it was the lure of an experienced hunter. Cautiously moving forward, I noticed fresh tracks of a wolverine. Large, confident. The animal was clearly not afraid and was not hiding. For 3 days I watched the area. The wolverine appeared and disappeared, but always stuck to the same spot. It was strange. Usually these beasts don't stay in one area for long. She's guarding something, Gregory Thompson suggested, studying the tracks. Or someone. The fog was especially thick that day. It was as if the wolverine had been waiting for me. It appeared suddenly, about 10 meters away, staring me straight in the eye. I clutched the hilt of my knife, feeling my heart pounding. Wolverine was no joke. If it decided to attack, it would be a short conversation. But the beast seemed to have other things on its mind. She moved slowly into the thicket, glancing back every now and then. She wasn't running away. She was leading me. The old tunnel appeared suddenly, just a black hole in the hillside, overgrown with thick shrubbery around its edges. Wolverine stopped at the entrance, let out his eerie scream, and disappeared into the fog. A flashlight beam caught out of the darkness rusted rails, crumbling fixtures and crates. Old, but clearly not as old as the adit itself. Now it made sense why Wolverine wouldn't leave this place. In the depths of the adit, I found the remains of expedition supplies. Canned goods, galettes, everything long ago spoiled, but the smell still attracted the predator. She must have set up some sort of pantry here. The drawers were filled with documents, yellowed folders with the reports of some scientific expedition from the early 60s. They were investigating the aftermath of the Tunguska meteorite fall, looking for traces of anomalies. Most of the papers had decayed, but I could make out some of them. One of the reports spoke about strange behavior of animals in certain areas of the reserve and unexplained failures in instrument readings. Gregory Thompson was silent for a long time when I showed him what I had found. Then he took out a cigarette, smoked, and told me that in his youth he himself had worked as a guide on that expedition. Only not all the documents were taken to Moscow then, he said quietly. Some of them were hidden here. Apparently they didn't want anyone to know. Wolverine never appeared in that neighborhood again. But sometimes, on particularly foggy days, I think I hear her eerie cry again. It was as if she was calling me somewhere further away, trying to show me something else. But I never found out what it was. Maybe it was for the best. Not all the mysteries of the taiga need to be solved by man. A week later, Gregory Thompson retired. "I've had enough," he said, patting me on the shoulder. "Now it's your turn to keep these woods and their secrets." I had no idea that this would be our last normal conversation, and that very soon life would confront me with choices for which I would be completely unprepared. The spring of 1995 began with gunshots. On that April day, I was patrolling the southern section of the preserve when I heard screams and bear roars. I still don't know what made me run to those sounds. The experience of a gamekeeper or human instinct. A boy of about 16 was huddled in the fork of an old pine tree, and below, rearing up on his hind legs, a huge bear was rampaging. Shots in the air only made the beast hotter. I had to shoot to kill. There might not be a second chance. I've never liked killing animals, but sometimes there's no choice. The kid turned out to be the son of Ethan Sloan, deputy head of the Regional Conservation Committee. I found out the next day when the official came to thank me personally. I was expecting the usual handshake, maybe a bottle of cognac, but Sokolov was not one to throw around empty words. "I have the opportunity to help with your children's education," he said then, "and the apartment issue can be solved. You know, in the regional center, good housing is just being vacated." I was silent, looking out the window of the cordon. For 15 years of living in the settlement, my wife and I had not been able to solve this problem, and the children were growing up. They needed to study further. A week later, Sokolov came again, already with documents. Everything was clean, official. Targeted training for the children, a service apartment. "You understand," he smiled. "Sometimes you just have to turn a blind eye to some little things. After all, it's just hunting. Not poaching. Hunting. For respectable, serious people." I remembered Thompson's words about the taiga, which does not forgive mistakes. For a moment I had a picture in front of my eyes. Here I was conducting another inspection. Here I was making an honest report. But then I thought of my daughter, who dreams of becoming a doctor, of my son, who needs a good education. And my mentor's voice fell silent, dissolved in the noise of the spring forest. I agreed. Maybe because I was tired of the eternal struggle with poverty. Maybe because I saw my wife patching up the children's old clothes. Or maybe I just decided I had the right to think about myself and my family for once. The first elite hunt took place in May. The forest was silent. Only the echo of the shots walked between the pines, like a stranger in his own home. I made sure that everything was in order. One shot, no torture. "This is not poaching," I repeated to myself. "This is order. Everything under control, everything by the rules. New rules. The money came right away. Big money. My daughter got into a good college. My son started preparing for college. Life was getting better. Gradually, I started to think differently. We have to develop the area somehow, I said at meetings. The reserve must be useful, I persuaded my colleagues. I learned to make beautiful reports, where everything fit together. Everything was right, on paper. In October, I met Gregory Thompson by chance in the village. He knew it all at once, the new car, the suit, the way I said. "What are you doing, Nicholas?" he asked quietly. I flared up. I started talking about the modern approach to conservation, about not living in the past. "Did you have an easy life? Did you have kids?" I threw it in his face. "Times have changed, Timofeich." He looked at me for a long time, as if seeing me for the first time. A shadow flashed in his eyes. Not anger, not disappointment, but something akin to pity. I wanted to say something else, to explain, to justify myself, but my throat constricted, as if the taiga itself were looking at me through him. Then he turned and walked away, and I remained standing in the middle of the street, feeling something inside me break. But there was no turning back, or I just didn't want to look for it. Now I have everything I ever dreamed of. My children study in the regional center. My wife no longer darns old jackets. I've become a respected man, a member of high offices. They say I'll soon be promoted to the region, and the taiga. The taiga is silent. I don't hear its voices anymore. Either it has gone silent, or I have forgotten how to listen. Sometimes, looking at the sunset from my new balcony, I wait for it to speak again, as it did then in the fog. But the silence is more oppressive than any words, and yesterday in the mailbox I found an unsigned note. "You chose the wrong side." The handwriting looked familiar, but I didn't remember whose handwriting it was. Some things are better not knowing for sure. They say that TAIGA knows how to wait. Unlike humans, she has an eternity ahead of her. She has seen generations come and go, laws and boundaries change, rules replaced by others. But her own laws remain the same. Yesterday, I received an order to transfer to the region. Now I will supervise several reserves at once, make plans and reports, participate in meetings. Everything as it should be. An office, a secretary, a sign on the door. The children are proud. Their father is now a big boss. Before I left, I went up to my old cordon. It is completely overgrown. The roof has sagged, but the smell remains the same. Pine needles, smoke, last year's leaves. In the corner I found my first gamekeeper's notebook. On the last page was a map of the bypass, drawn by Gregory Thompson's trembling hand. They say he's in a bad way. Lives alone in his cabin on the edge of the village, hardly ever goes out. I was going to visit him before I left. I even drove to the gate, but I didn't dare go in. And this morning, when I was packing for the move, I found another note. The TAIGA knows how to forgive, but only those who know how to ask for forgiveness. The handwriting was the same as last time. And somewhere very far away, at the very edge of hearing, I thought I heard that strange crying in the fog again. And now for the fun part, the questions to which everyone will have a different answer. Who is a bigger criminal to you? The poacher who kills an animal for a piece of bread for his children, or the gamekeeper who allows the rich to hunt in the reserve for money? Is Gregory Thompson a principled conservationist, or just an old man who doesn't understand the new realities of life? Maybe his pity for Nicholas is envy of other people's success. And most importantly, has Nicholas really sold out, or has he simply become wiser and learned to compromise? Maybe we are too idealistic about the work of a gamekeeper. I look forward to your thoughts in the comments. I'm sure each of you has something to say about it. If you like this story, support the channel by liking and subscribing. There are many more ambiguous stories from the life of the TAIGA and people who think they know its secrets. See you in the next videos.